Welcome to the AI Security Update, where we discuss the latest in AI and security. Today, I'm so excited to introduce our guest for this episode, John Morton. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Anmol. Happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
So, John, can you please introduce yourself? We were classmates at GW, but can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. As Anmol said, we were classmates at GW through the CEAS program, the doctorate CEAS program. I'm looking forward to the discussion here, but a little bit about me. I recently got a doctorate degree in 2024 at GW, currently serving there as an adjunct faculty in the cyber analytics field specifically. Advising students that are transitioning out of the curriculum into the doctorate phase. Served as a research advisor for several students that have gone on and got their doctorate degree in the cyber analytics field, as well as the preparatory class that goes before they start their doctorate phase. There's a preparatory class called the Praxis Research Practice, and that's essentially a transition class. So I've also taught that as well, and mentored and advised other students pretty much at the master's and the doctorate level. In terms of transitioning, in terms of my career, probably I would say 30 plus years in the industry, primarily in the infrastructure, cyber, more recently kind of AI space. Serve right now with a federal systems integrator, and our customer set is primarily government customers. Think FedCiv, such as HHS, SSA. We have on the as well as DHS, Homeland Security, as well as customers on the high side in the IC space, as well. So serving in various capacities on that. Leading everything from application development, DevSecOps, movement to cloud, digital transformation, etc. So a lot of work there, just bringing solutions and services to our various customer mission sets. So that's primarily what I've been doing for the last 30 years. It's been very rewarding.
Yeah, that's such a great background. I think it's such a challenge because we see technology moving so fast. And I think that applies to AI security as well.
Yes, absolutely.
When we were students, we weren't talking about ChatGPT that much. And now it's everywhere.
It's almost mainstream.
Yeah. So, John, what are some challenges you see in the AI security space right now?
Great question. As you mentioned, we were seeing kind of AI is really hit almost become mainstream, and it's hit pretty much every single industry. I mean, you turn on the news and it's AI this, AI that. So it's definitely becoming more, I would say, the fabric of our daily lives and across many industries. Some of the challenges that, though, obviously with this transformation challenge, or this transformation that's really become upon us, it does present a set of challenges. We can talk about, let's talk about threat, insider threat. Yeah, you mentioned ChatGPT. I know other industries are looking now at, your ChatGPTs, your Claude, your Geminis. You're looking at these services, if you will, these tools, and they're becoming digital workers. They're almost becoming digital assistants, helping us, with the little mundane tasks, either setting up a PowerPoint, writing a document, checking an email, etc. So as that adoption continues and becomes more mainstream, the threat surface actually opens up. And what I mean by that is now we must look at, if we're going to have, I would say, let's take a digital twin, a digital worker, that entity, if you will, has an identity. That entity will, if you will, has access, right? So we need to look at treating, specifically when you talk about in the IL-6, IL-7 types of environments and the high side environments. We need to start treating these digital entities almost as human, putting the same guardrails, putting the same constraints around what they have access to. As this adoption essentially, continues, as the acceleration, the compute behind these things gets more intense. These agents are going to get more intelligent. Um, these agents are going to get more astute. They're going to move at velocity and speed that's going to keep going exponentially. And those challenges organizations have to be prepared for that. Using GRC and governance, risk, and compliance, and putting the appropriate guardrails, zero trust, those principles essentially in place, to essentially protect themselves. And I think governance is really going to be the key, as well. There's going to be a lot of challenges around the governance. How do what policies do we need to kind of put in place?
So I would imagine that this is very difficult to implement and practice. John, you're coming from the government side with government customers.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, in the government, they have additional security restrictions that maybe in the private sector they might not have. So how do you see it when we think about agentic AI security and access control? When you're talking about agentic AI or AI agents, we want to limit access to the resources they have. How do we stay up to date with the challenges that are happening right now?
I think the challenges that were happening right now goes back to your basic fundamental cyber hygiene practices, right? I mean, if you really pull the layer back of what they're doing, this, as I mentioned, this agent still has an identity and it still has access. So you strip the identity piece away, it still has access, right? Now, and we're not talking about, um, the same thing as like, for example, a non-human actor, like a service account, for example, that has access to certain things within inside an ecosystem. So I think it goes back to basically, um, basic cyber hygiene practices, fundamental, blocking and tackling type of practices. You got to keep that baseline. The second piece is now we have to look at things in almost like in a series of a chain in terms of if I install a software package, yeah, I do my checksums, it may be benign. There's no issue there. I go to runtime. Okay, great. But during the execution, you have to look at the chain of events to determine if there's any threat actors, if there's any essentially anomalies. So identifying things in isolation, I think is good, but it needs to be elevated. So we need to look at the series of these steps that are occurring in order to get set outcome. So identifying really those patterns, those items, what is there making any lateral movement? Is the north south, east west. So I think it's now not taking things in isolation, but looking at holistic patterns and try to identify, hey, is there some type of anomaly there? And things like the zero trust can help us with that. But but we need to get essentially more astute, more fine tuned, more calibration on the tool to look at really patterns, trends, further anomalies versus just things kind of in isolation. So I think those are the things we can do for the here and now. But just I think your basic practices right now, can help. But I think there's a ways to go in terms of being on the defensive. Last point, leveraging essentially, we're working on some of these experiments now, leveraging essentially AI in the defensive mode. A lot of people talk about offensive cyber, but basically, how can we leverage essentially AI now to detect those patterns, as I mentioned, as well to thwart, or mitigate any types of future attacks. So the fundamentals, I think, still kind of exist. We just need to expand upon those fundamentals, um, to get better fidelity, more insights into really what's occurring into these ecosystems.
Right. I always teach everyone that we still need to know the fundamentals. When we were
Mhm.
students, we learned the fundamentals of AI, of machine learning, of cyber analytics. And John, as an advisor and as a instructor, in cyber analytics, where we're combining AI and cybersecurity oftentimes. What's some of your advice to educational institutions, or what are some of your observations as an instructor? How do we prepare students for the evolving nature of AI security?
I think you can just start by looking at the individual self. We consume, let's look at our smartphones, for example, right? Let's look at our laptops. So the things that we interact with on a day in, day out basis. Number one is being astute, being kind of aware of, our surroundings, not, basic phishing types of attacks. So understanding kind of, I would say, protecting your data, protecting your identity, I think is definitely paramount. How do we do that? On your smartphone device, just make sure you have the basic controls essentially outlined. Um, be conscientious of your emails that essentially that come in, and your social media accounts. As you think about this ecosystem that you're building, you probably have a social media account, you probably have an email account, you probably have a OneDrive account. So you've got, these various accounts that have, I would say, these digital footprints about your identity. So how now do you have to be number one cognizant of the ecosystem that you touch and where your actually data is going, and start from there, and then, put those essentially those protections essentially in place. It's being aware, being a good custodian about your identity, about the data that you have. I think that's just paramount, because AI is all about the data, right? Without any data, there's no there's no AI. But the more data that you provide AI, the more intelligence it's going to have. The other thing is be cognizant of, as these tools continue to be adopted, they're learning. So that's why there needs to always be, I would say, a human in the loop. Great, we can use the tool, but let's use the tool smartly and intelligently, because like I said, have some governance around your own.
Yeah, great points. I think almost everyone I've had on this show, they're advocates for human in the loop. And I think
Mhm,
everyone is saying we don't want to just let AI, go off the rails like what we saw with OpenAI and Hugging Face. We want to make sure we have governance and guardrails in place for
mhm,
security. And I think
absolutely.
when we have students and we see them learning about AI security, the challenge is the technology is moving so fast. So, for example, when we were working on our research, we were looking at AI models to secure certain things. Like, for example, my research was about using AI for data poisoning attack detection, for example, or attacking AI with data poisoning. And people might say, hey, with generative AI, we have new attacks. But still, I think the fundamentals apply, like what we learned in research. So even behind ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, we have other systems as well that are using predictive analytics, that are using AI and machine learning. So I think students should look at the fundamentals, like you're saying, and they should still learn the fundamentals instead of just using ChatGPT or Gemini to find out the answer. But what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Oh, 100% agree. Like I said, as you touched on, there always needs to be a human in the loop. You need to be judicious and govern yourself accordingly about the technology that we have pretty much at our fingertips. Um, but there's also, you don't want to have an erosion of, I would say, of human intelligence, as well. We don't want to use it as a crutch so much that now we just sit back in a chair and it goes off and essentially and does its thing. There's a delicate, I think there's a delicate balance there of using it judiciously for being more productive. So the idea is that you would use it to enhance some of your smaller tasks. Hey, I maybe like a research paper. I want to, I do a spell check. I may want to just, check it for, an AI integrity check, for example. I know when we were there, at least as part of it in an advising role, one of the things that we did was actually check students' papers, not only for plagiarism, but also for how much AI content was out there. And it kind of gives you an AI score. So you do have to be, you can certainly leverage it, but it shouldn't be to a point where you actually lose your narrative and your messaging. Um, in the actual topic or paper or or what have you, because it's it's almost plagiarism because it's not really the students from the students' point of view or the students' work. I know educators are becoming more astute and more aware and putting in tighter controls and guardrails on said papers, artifacts, essays, homework assignments, testing, etc. So, yeah, as AI goes, education is essentially, right there. So use it, but use it wisely. But I say there are checks and balances.
Yeah, checks and balances, very important. Um, and so, John, you're bringing 30 years of digital transformation experience. A question I have for you is, based on all of your experience, how is AI security the same or different compared to moving to the cloud or any other digital transformations you've seen? And how can enterprises prepare for this?
Sure. I think they're somewhat the same, but they're somewhat different. When I think about digital transformation, think about, this has gone back a couple of years where we had, these computers, things. I got my smartphone here, and the stuff that I can run on my smartphone today used to be in a data center. So you think about how far we've come just in the last, couple of decades, and those transformation things in terms of moving workloads, if you will, out of, from these big monolithic mainframe types of computers, which we still have, by the way. They may not be in data centers, but they're in cloud data centers, but we still have, by the way. But nonetheless, I say that to say these transformational things, such as moving now workloads to the cloud, now moving, the advent essentially of the internet, going to more kind of virtual space. So you're kind of moving, I would say, up the stack. Now you look at kind of turn the knobs on AI. It's like the transformation occurs, then we react to the transformation to kind of let it settle in. There's just kind of this inflection point, almost like a sine wave. So you have the transformation, you have kind of an up ramp, then it gets to kind of a plateau. Okay, hey, now cloud is becoming mainstream. Some organizations and customers we're working on, we're talking about now hybrid, cloud, move everything to the cloud. Now we're taking a step back for various reasons due to, control, due to maybe cost constraints, due to security, and, et cetera. I mean, look at the hyperscalers. AWS has had breaches, as well. Things kind of go down. So organizations, they want to kind of maintain some type of, control of those assets they have in their system. So, but you look at that transformation, I think there's always kind of some type of inflection point. So with the cloud, I think we're seeing that now. We're seeing kind of an adoption of hybrid, as I mentioned. We're seeing some customers kind of offloading them as they come back on prem. But I think, you have your transformation, then you have your adoption, then you have, okay, now you have your controls, you have your governance, kind of set in. And now we see the kind of this AI piece kind of get involved. But I think that's more widespread. Your digital transformation is more kind of, I would say, an infrastructure layer, your SaaS layer, where you have more software as a service. Things are now kind of outsourced. But now with the AI, I mean, this is really just this is hitting more from a user experience perspective, where we can now pick up our smartphones and do a Claude agent. We can it's embedded in, in pretty much everything we do today, everything we touch. Even, sometimes you keep your smartphone just in listening mode, right? And it picks up information, and you may see, hey, um, I was just looking at, some sneakers in my in the store, and all of a sudden it comes up in your social media feed, your Facebook, your IG. So that's all goes back to the data. That's all goes back to kind of now AI is harvesting this information. Google Photos, now it's taking my photos, for example, for the past 10 years and creating albums automatically. So you look at these types of things that AI is so kind of intertwined. It is very transformational. But now I think we're starting to see, how do we put, it goes back to the governance. How do we put, what's the risk that it, and really the compliance. So this thing is moving, almost at the speed of light. So we're still kind of playing catch up a little bit in various areas. But, I think it's going to come to, an inflection point here in terms of kind of what's next. But I would say the same things apply. We had to put governance around to move the cloud. We had to put security controls around moving things to cloud. That was the advent of the FedRAMP. You talk about what's the risk. I think it really comes down to risk. Do I move to the cloud? Do I, go double tap on an AI? I'll give you a specific example. For example, I know several customers that we work with, they are adopting AI, but they're not, for example, opening up the corpus of data that AI has access to the internet. They're really putting tight controls around the corpus of data. So we are seeing, uh, yes, some adoption, but we're also seeing, I would say, a cautious, essentially adoption as well. So I think taking that path. We're seeing organizations now. You mentioned multiple AI tools, ChatGPT, Gemini. Maybe they're going, using kind of a hybrid model. I mean, that's to talk about the Hugging Face attack. That was ChatGPT and Claude, together, as part of that attack, doing different things. So we need to, this is, we're still kind of in this transformational phase, but we're also playing catch up, if you will. And that happens kind of with everything, even with the advent of the internet. We're still
Yeah.
playing. Exactly. So it just kind of goes in these ways. I still kind of think we're kind of still in the upward swing of these waves as more of these AI capabilities become more mainstream.
And John, you mentioned something really interesting about this hybrid approach and how you see customers, they're trying to protect the data so they won't connect the AI to the internet, for example. And I think even when I'm talking with people, just people who aren't even in technology, like one of the people I knew at the gym, he was a personal trainer, and he told me he has this old computer for all of his payroll and accounting, and he doesn't connect it to the internet because that's where all the bad stuff is. And he's like, he's not even in technology, but he says like, okay, I have this old 10-year-old computer and I'm going to
Yeah,
use it for all of my accounting. I just won't connect it to the internet. And I just thought, yeah, that's that's what people are doing with AI too.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And John, we mentioned OpenAI and Hugging Face, but is there another current event that you think our audience should know about?
Um, yeah, let's take a minute to look at critical infrastructure. We talk, what I mean by critical infrastructure is you talk about your power, you talk about your waterways, your utilities, your electrical grids, those types of things. Critical infrastructure. Now, a lot of these systems, if you will, are older systems. Some haven't been patched. We talked about proper cyber hygiene and keeping the latest and greatest. Some of these systems are, you know, 10, 15 years old and very susceptible and have a large attack surface. One recently that was there was a breach of the Mexican water system that happened, I think, in mid Q2 of this year. Basically, AI gained agents, bad actors from an AI agent gained access to the critical infrastructure system. Luckily, there was appropriate guardrails essentially, in place. There was no harm, no foul was actually detected. The API, it tried to probe different APIs to get into various parts, essentially of the system to shut it down. Luckily, it was kind of, I would say, segmented off and isolated. But I think that's more recent. You're going to see more of I would say, an emphasis because as threat actors go, adversaries are now not hitting your systems. They're leveraging the AI to hit other AI pieces. So I don't think you're gonna see more. I think of a trend. A keen focus needs to be on our critical infrastructure because now we're talking real. We're not talking data breaches. We're talking now severe impact. Those critical infrastructure, those systems, I think are very susceptible with the speed that AI is going to. That's one area that we need to. It's gonna be a big challenge area is to really protect our essentially our critical infrastructure, if you will. We talked about the Hugging Face attack. God forbid if that got out of its sandbox and hit I live in Virginia, hit Dominion Power, for example, and took down the power grid. Who knows? So that's why we have to be very mindful and very keen of, having these appropriate measures in place and being aware of what's going on from an AI perspective.
Yeah, agreed. A critical infrastructure security is so important. And I
Mm-hmm.
think just this week, we saw that in the US, we have water plants that have been attacked in various states. And we're seeing that more and more adversaries are targeting critical infrastructure, and AI could be a tool that people use to attack critical infrastructure. But then it's really difficult to take the governance and implement it in practice. So, for example, in the US, I talked with another guest on this show, Santina White, I would say
Mm-hmm.
back in February, and we were talking about critical infrastructure and water plants being secure. And back then it was a theoretical notion. And we had Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They released a practice guide on how you secure a water plant. And that was one of the examples they gave. And they gave a tabletop exercise to emulate this water plant being attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And now, fast forward to August, early August, and we see that water plants are being attacked in Mexico and in various states in the US. So we have agencies or we have subject matter experts that know that this is so important. But then how do we bring this expertise to state and local governments, to the actual personnel that are in charge of securing critical infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Is how do we bring those in there? And I think it goes back to really we talked about the fundamentals, right? If you look at just basic, the critical infrastructure has a lot of technical debt. I would say we talked about the antiquated system, so that attack surface, if you will, essentially is very right for AI bad actor, if you will, to kind of penetrate it. So, number one, getting a baseline of your system, understanding really all the piece of parts that comprise that critical infrastructure, the interconnectivity. What do I control? What do I interface with? So, I would say observability is really key to understand where you have, and then identifying. Working with those state and local agencies, coalescing, working with the contractors, and like I said, in Virginia, the Dominion Power, um the Columbia Gas, essentially of the world. Also kind of our our electrical electrical providers, our gas providers, our water providers, etc. um Understanding what they have, identifying maybe, hey, I've got some, I would say, some critical infrastructure tech debt that I've kind of kicked down the road a little bit, and now it's becoming real. And looking to make an investment to modernize that infrastructure and essentially to protect it. So it's understanding there, then assessing, creating that roadmap to modernize. And what I mean by modernize is not only just modernize, update to the latest system, but hey, taking a real no kidding look at really where my susceptible points of entry are. And then looking and putting that into your modernization roadmap. And then, putting those appropriate guardrails in place. So it's going to take an investment. But if you look at the opportunity cost of that investment, hey, would I rather, take down 100,000 people for 5 days and then have to, fix that? What is the opportunity cost of that particular breach versus, okay, here I'm now taking the time, understanding what I have, modernizing the equipment, and then making the appropriate updates, changes, to put those more resilient, I would say, security guidelines and guardrails in place to mitigate the risk. You're not going to totally mitigate it, but if you can close your aperture, your risk aperture, um, 40, 50, 60%, that's definitely that's definitely a win. So assess, create a roadmap, understand where your points of, your key points of entry are. Look, essentially look to modernize and, tighten those security control. Understand what you have and what your interfaces are. But it's going to take a collective to do that. Partner with the critical infrastructure at the state and local level. If it is, they need to kind of partner together and understand this holistically because of that is all kind of intertwined.
Yeah, really, really great points. And I think that's such a challenge because organizations, they're generally very large. There are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different moving parts. Getting everyone together on the same email thread or in the same room, that's really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's something that needs to be done because, like you said, it won't mitigate the risk entirely because in security, nothing can be 100% secure, but reducing the attack surface is really important. It's like we want to make it harder for someone to attack the system versus saying, here's our password. All you have to do is open the door and you get our password.
Yeah.
You want to have different layers of security to prevent someone from just getting in.
Absolutely. Yeah, getting in the room, let me just touch on that a minute. And that needs to be driven by you mentioned this, the state and local. So that needs to be driven by the policymakers, the people that are actually making legislation, say this is going to be a top priority. So making this a top priority at the legislative level will drive, those actions for individuals or entities, if you will, to collaborate and get in that same room and understand this is not just a me problem. This is an us problem.
Yeah, great point. And what's some of your advice for these policymakers and the legislative sector? How do they know what to prioritize? Because we've seen in technology, from our world, we look at things very differently than someone might on the policy side. So how do both parties communicate effectively? Any thoughts on that? How do technology people communicate to the policy people and policy people communicate to the tech people?
You have to have the tech people and the policymakers at the table to understand, okay, hey, here's what we need from a policy perspective. You don't have to get into the technical details, but it needs to be a collaborative effort. I'm not going to say it's workshops. I'm not going to get into the mechanics of the how to, but there needs to be a tight coupling between the tech people and essentially and the and the policymakers. Maybe it's a we've seen these committees. Let's take let's take Doge, for example. I hate to mention the Doge part, but that was stood up at the at the national level, at the federal level. It had a specific charge. That charge was to really look across the agencies to identify where can we take some, where can we reduce cost? Where can we kind of modernize? Where do we have a lot of, financial waste, if you will, human waste, if you will, and become more efficient, right? So that was very targeted. I mean, that same concept could be stood up for, okay, we're going to set up a task force at the state and local level to look at, okay, our critical infrastructure or really these top priorities. And this group of individuals are going to be represented. There's going to be representation from the industry. There's going to be representation from the policymakers, et cetera. So it's got to be driven by the top, but it's got to be a collective, essentially, approach in order to come up with the policies that's going to drive the strategy that's going to drive essentially the execution, and everyone needs to be rowing in the same direction. You can't have your policymakers are here and your tech. Everybody's got to be pretty much rowing in the same direction. So we have head nods north and south, and and moving forward essentially in unison. Once it becomes bespoke, that's where things kind of go off the rails. But just simple, basic, easier said than done. But you've looked at blueprints. You have constructs that can do that and make, enforce, to develop a roadmap or strategy guide. But I think it's going to be collective between both.
What's an analogy for just the regular person in the neighborhood to explain an AI security concept?
I give my intern a task to do. That intern doesn't just work 8 to 5. You give the intern access to the building, but you lose sight of really what that intern is actually doing once they're in the building. In terms of getting, hey, I need to do task X. I'm going to look in this filing cabinet. I'm going to maybe, go down the hallway to look in somebody's desk. But the notion that the AI is actually working 24/7, I think is really the analogies essentially to the to this this intern concept. I think that's really the best way I can describe it. It's how we not only giving access, the master key, if you will, to the building, but also just understanding, okay, what doors and what other access once they're inside the border, once they're inside the boundary, having visibility in those appropriate, access controls. Now you need to give them a key to, an office. Now you need to give them a key to the supply closet, or what have you. Really getting more fidelity on those, access controls. And it goes down the lateral movement, protecting that lateral movement, air gapping, where we can, where it makes sense, least bit, um, only giving that entity access to what they really need. And then the base access
Least
control.
privilege.
Least privilege, exactly. So those are basic we go back, we talked about the fundamentals. I always go back to the fundamentals because that gets you at least 60 to 70% there. You may have to do some other tweaking, but the fundamentals, I don't think, change whatsoever, whether it's an AI person or whether it's a human person.
So, John, thank you so much for being on the show. Just to recap what we talked about, the fundamentals are really important and communication is important. We need to communicate tech people, policy people. And that's why on this show, I have people from all different backgrounds talking about AI security, so we can learn about AI security from all these different perspectives. So before we close, John, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, Emma, number one, appreciate the opportunity. It was definitely an eye-opening, engaging discussion on a very relevant and important topic. I think the work that we're doing here, and with your work, and is raising awareness, bringing in the industry experts, bringing, like you mentioned, policymakers, bringing, the best in the breed, to the table so we can understand all the, the intersection of AI and security is, it's, it's definitely transformational. So, it's here, it's now, and we need to embrace it, but we also need to make sure that, we're being very judicious, very conscientious, and, actually keeping security in the forefront. We need to shift left. Recently heard the term far left. We're talking, not talking security by design, but we're also talking embedding, security throughout, and everything. So yeah, I think AI and security is going to go hand in glove, offensive, defensive. But yeah, it's definitely an exciting time. It's also a little bit of a scary time, but we're here along for the ride, and I think forums and platforms like this, raising awareness and providing thought leadership and ideas, I think is definitely needed. So appreciate you and the work that you're doing with this platform. So look forward to continuing discussions.
Thank you so much, John, for being on the show. And this concludes our episode of the AI Security Update. We'll be back next time with more great conversations.